Already people are beginning to pour into the session. If you haven't been to a Future Trends forum, let me just point out a couple of details. If you look at the screen, you'll see two content items. One of them is the three of us, and we are, that's one of the presenter spots on stage. And on the right, let's see, right here, is a PowerPoint slide. We're going to get rid of that pretty soon. And that's where the presenters are. We call it the stage. And below us is where all of you guys are. That's the participants swarm. This is the audience and the participants area. And you'll see that people get to move around and interact. Some of them are represented by photos or schematics, some of them by video feeds. And if you are just joining us right now, we'll be starting in about a minute and a half. Why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself to people in this group? And a good way of doing that is by chat. If you haven't used this before, take your cursor, mouse over your icon or your avatar, and you'll see a whole group of options. One of them is the option for instant message chat. Click that, and it'll open up a chat box for your room. So why don't you take a minute and say hello and where you are this morning and or afternoon and or evening, depending on where you are on the planet Earth. For example, we're in Boston, even if I can't type sideways. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the Future Trends Forum. We are coming to you live from the Heinz Convention Center in Boston as part of the Campus Technology Conference. So this is an unusual session. Rather than having two of us discussing things, myself and a guest, now we have a whole swarm of people in addition to the swarm of participants. So we're beginning right now with one guest, but let me begin by just quickly introducing you to the forum and to the structure of the technology. So to begin with, this is a, if you get to the next slide, please. We're using the Future Trends Forum to explore themes that come up in the Future Trends in Technology Education report. So if you don't know that, go to ftte.us and you can see a lot more there. This is only possible, by the way, by the support of two different groups. We really want to thank NYSERNet in New York, the hosts, among other things, in the NYSCIO event. We were there last week and they had a terrific conference, and we're really grateful for their support. We're also really grateful to Shindig, who supports us in two ways. Shindig provides the technology that you can see here, and behind the scenes and around the scenes provide a whole series of excellent people like Christopher and Zach who do terrific support. So we're really grateful to them. Now the technology works in some interesting ways. If you're new to this event, here where we are is the stage. This is where presenters and presentation material live. The bottom is the whole swarm of participants, where we have dozens and dozens and eventually more than 100 people. If you want to interact with us, we have four different ways. The first is, if you'd like to come up on stage with us, click on the very, very bottom right of the screen, click the raise hand option. That will tell us that you want to come up on stage and talk. So if your camera is working and your mic is working, use that. If, on the other hand, you'd like to chat with us, if you have a question or comment you want us to read out loud, click the ask button and we'll do that. You can also go on Twitter, where hashtag is FTTE, and people are already chatting, or you can click the chat box and type in there. Now, we're in a bit of a hurry because we have a tight schedule. We're four very busy and excellent people. So let me begin by asking Perry. Perry Samson from the University of Michigan, where I also got several degrees, is a meteorologist and the founder of a projects, including Wonderground, my favorite weather site. Perry, what are you presenting on today?
Oh, today's topic is has to do with large classes. How do we become more efficient at large classes? Because these really pay the bills at universities, and are often a place of just deserts for pedagogy. So the concept is, how do I help the students know what they don't know, and how do I know what they don't know? The technologies I've tried to create, it was what's called lecture tools. Now Echo 360 has acquired it. And the whole concept is started as a way for me to interact with students. I can ask more questions, kind of like clickers on steroids, where I can ask many more types of questions than I could before. And from that, I can do formative assessments, see what students do and don't understand. But the greatest thing that's come out of that, and what I'll talk about today, is that it collects data, just like with meteorology. The Weather Underground put sensors in people's backyards, and you can connect your own sensor, and from that we collect enough data that our weather models became better. Likewise, in the classroom, if you collect enough data about what students are doing during class, it turns out, and the thing I'm presenting today is that now, looking at several classes at the University of Michigan, we are able to predict by week 2 who's going to fail the course with about 80% accuracy. Whoa. And that raises a whole bunch of other questions going forward. So now what do I do?
Yeah.
Okay, Johnny, I know you're in trouble.
Right.
But I now have to come up with the interventions that might be, which might help that student. And that's going to be the next.
That's a huge challenge. And there's quite an ethical situation there, too, where if you have that information, then you're compelled to act.
Well, that is a fear I've got. Like with weather forecasting, will I get sued if I don't help the student knowing that they're in trouble?
If this technology is out there, will the university be challenged to roll it out universally?
I think universities will be excited about this because if you're worried about student retention and you're worried about student success, achievement, then this is a way that you can now measure much earlier in the semester and warn that student that they're in trouble. Now, many of the early warning systems we have now are based on their grades and their background information, but that often doesn't kick in until after the first exam, which I argue is too late.
Yeah,
you've got to be able to know earlier who's going to be in trouble, who needs some extra support. And I believe that working with advisors on campus, giving them access to these kinds of data and triggering the fact that this student is not behaving in a way that looks like they're going to be successful, that we can find interventions which might motivate the student to change.
Do you think this could be, people could fear this leading to grade inflation? If students bail out of classes, they're likely to fail.
That we would worry if the grades went up in class. I mean,
I might not.
Learning's increasing.
I understand. I'm just wondering about different responses that people might have.
We'll worry about that one if it happens. And right now, we'd like to see it happening.
Yeah, I like that idea.
We need to try to find ways to catch the students. And the exciting part here is it comes down to information about what they actually do during class. Do they answer questions? Do they get the questions right during class? Are they taking notes? How many notes are they taking? We're actually mining the students' notes and able to put them together into sort of a what's trending in class today to help the students study.
Where does this data live?
Well, it's in the cloud. It's all in the Amazon cloud, and the university gets full access to the data. My whole enthusiasm here is to get institutions like Michigan to funnel the data from their LMS, funnel the data from Echo or whoever they use, other vendors in their SIS system into Essential Core, and of course protect student identity, but make a playground, a sandbox where we can start doing research on what is it that in this technology which is helping the student. Show some evidence.
Yeah.
That it's objectively, everybody can look at and everybody can analyze. And so objectively, does this technology help the classroom? And putting systems like this together, I think, is key to how we might actually get more faculty to try new things in the classroom.
For a public institution like Michigan, I imagine the state legislature would like this. They really want to push this. As a way of improving
I'm not about
value.
to speak for a politician.
Well, we can have hand puppets for that, but I think I can imagine that being seen as a public good.
That's our hope. As my job is simply to help my students in my class, and I need to do that well. I need the students to understand what they don't understand. They call metacognition, and this technology can help that.
We just had a keynote speech by Richard DeMillo, who, in his book, not in his speech, speaks about the benefits of metacognition and how vital that can be to really helping students improve and learn better. Just so everyone should know in the audience, if you have questions or comments, again, please use one of those 4 channels to give us some feedback. If you have any questions for Perry, he's going to be here for about 90 more seconds. If you can't get a question in that time, but you still have a question, please let us know and we'll bug him by email. Meantime, greetings to Cheryl in Raleigh, Sandro in Portugal, James in Charlottesville, Marcy in San Antonio, Niket in Cambridge, Mass, not too far away from where we are right now. You have to get going. You have to actually present on this subject face to face.
I have to do that in about 4 minutes. So.
Well, let me thank you so much for coming.
Ryan, thank you.
This is a fantastic project. I think we may be seeing here on FTE, we may be seeing the birth of a new form of data analytics and a new form of teaching and learning.
Well, that's a little strong, but
well, that's why I said we may be. Good luck.
Thanks.
Good luck.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, break a leg. Well, I said we had a whole series of guests, and now let me introduce you to yet another one. Now, one of the things that we do in the Future Transform is we take a look at higher education and its future from a series of different angles. We try and slice the angles from populations. So we've had administrators, we've had faculty, we've had researchers, journalists, but we also want to tackle different perspectives and different subjects. So just now we had Perry talking about big data, data analytics, data mining, which is a massive subject that we've touched on before and we'll return. But now we have Scott, I want to pronounce this Reinke?
Rinke.
Mm-hmm. And Scott is coming to you with a very, very different perspective. He's coming to you from the great field of gaming and gamification. And you're at Ball State, right?
Yep, Ball State University.
So it's our second Ball State. Are you called Ball Staters?
Cardinals.
Cardinals. So it's our second Cardinal that we've had on the Future Transform so far. Welcome. I'm so glad you're able to come.
Thank you.
To begin with, can you give us a quick précis about what you're going to be talking about? You already had a workshop yesterday.
Yeah.
And are you doing a presentation this week as well?
No, I don't have a session this week. I just did the workshop.
That's too bad. But tell us about your workshop. What were you talking about in terms of gaming and gaming for learning?
So the workshop was called Problem Solving Through Gamification in Higher Education.
Problem solving. Nice.
And the idea is that when you go through the process of creating a game or creating a gamification solution, you have to really have a certain level of empathy for your players and your users. You have to think from their perspective. It's kind of a different perspective on usability, even.
Yeah.
You know, in order to make something engaging and fun, you have to understand it from a lot of different angles.
Right.
So in the workshop, I had gone over some tropes of game design and gamification that are fairly common, like games have goals and rules and strategy and flavor. And then we went forward into a brainstorming process where all of them would write down what problems they were seeing in higher education or that they wanted to solve, and then did some paper prototyping and eventually some mock-ups.
Were the problems strategic about, say, education as a whole or institution, or were they about their individual classes and pedagogy?
There was a mixture. There was a very interesting mixture, actually. A few people were interested in faculty training. A few people were interested in professional training for other staffers. I had one person in particular that was working on creating a game to digitize cadavers for students to learn about that in a digital VR environment. So lots of different areas that people were interested in.
Was that a biology class or a forensics class?
I think it was forensics, but I can't remember exactly. Yeah.
Or it could be one of those creative Gothic literature classes, which I would have definitely done. So how did people respond? What were some of the concerns and some of the opportunities that they saw?
Honestly, everyone that I've talked to has seemed really excited about gamification. They're excited for new ways to engage students, new ways to present material, and new ways for them to teach material as well. Because I mean, we say we don't like the sage on the stage. The educators don't either, and so creating new ways to engage those students, I think everyone's excited for it.
That's fantastic. I know you were just talking with Perry before we began about the possibility of using gamification as a response to what he discovered through his data. Let me go back to the empathy question. One of the typical criticisms of computer gaming is that it is actually anti-empathetic. The idea that violent games, for example, put you in the position of someone who commits violence, and they reduce the humanity of the others. I don't have a lot of sympathy for that charge myself. I think literature does that better, but can you say a bit more about how games actually help empathy, how they help humanize somebody else?
Well, I guess I didn't mean it in that way.
Oh, please.
In that kind of empathy. I meant more in terms of you have to be aware of how your user feels when they're using your product.
This is when you're talking from the perspective of a designer.
Yeah, from the perspective of a designer. Sorry, I didn't mean.
No, that's great. That's great.
you have to consider when does the player stop. When you're playing a game like on a Nintendo, you press start and the game begins. You select your mode, you jump. College doesn't work like that. There's no press start in college, really. Games will guide you through systematically. That they're really good at helping you, map. And education hasn't always been like that.
No,
So.
it's a. I don't know if you were here for Rich's keynote.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things he touched on was students who don't know how to. They haven't read the game manual for college, and we're seeing this increasingly with first-generation students, or sometimes international students, who just lack the social capital and the awareness of colleges, and that's increasingly an issue. And in terms of social issues in the U.S., this is a problem as we have increasing economic inequality. Do you think that you could use gamification or gaming to help students better learn the levels of college?
Yeah, absolutely. And not to have a quick plug for what we're doing at Ball State, but
go ahead.
That's actually the most of the premise for Ball State Achievements, the app that we're using for at-risk students, is we incentivize them to find things like their career coach, their academic advisor, the bursar's office, and help define those things for the student. So
at a smaller level, at Trinity University in Texas, they had a really nice alternate reality game that took place in their library. It was a murder, and you had to solve the crime.
Yes.
And the suspects were all library staff, which confirmed the fear of anybody who was really scared of librarians. Right? But in order to solve the crime, you had to go through the stacks. It's called Blood on the Stacks. And you had to go through the systems and learn everything else, which I thought was terrific. A really great way to humanize and make the library interesting. So it seems like you were doing that at just a larger scale. Find the bursar's office, or how to get into the LMS, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
If I could ask a couple more questions.
Sure.
What disciplines are especially interested in gaming in your experience? I mean, is there a pattern to this, or is it just anybody?
Man, honestly, it's been just about anybody. I haven't seen a whole lot of. I guess I'd have to think about people that strictly weren't interested in gamification, really.
Well, I know people like that, but
yeah.
Well, good. Gaming across the curriculum.
Yeah.
We have a question from Paul B. And Paul asks, games usually give points to players and move to different levels, leveling up.
Yeah.
What type of rewards are the students given in your scenario? That's the question.
Well, different types of players are rewarded in different ways. And I think that is a big kind of misconception with games and gamification. Because if you look at, there's something called Bartle's taxonomy, and he goes over player types. And there's 4 different player types: killers, achievers, explorers, and socializers. And that has to do with how people. I think he's going to pull up a chart to show that. And it has to do with what their motivations are in playing a game. And achievers are the type of people that we think of when we make almost any kind of gamification, which they like to act on the world and earn all the badges and do all the things.
Right.
Well, many people are socializers. They enjoy what they get out of games is actually interacting with other people and talking with them and expressing themselves.
Sure.
And so you can create rewards for socializers. Those will be different than for achievers. And explorers get a lot out of just finding new bugs in your system and new ways to win. They're the ones that really like to bend the rules. So, you can engage them not necessarily with the rewards, but by adding new pathways, by allowing them to explore and to break your tools. When you're designing a game or even gamification, you want to design in ways that people can break your game, because that people enjoy that. Whereas look out for explorers that do that. So it helps raise kind of both sides. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Paul, please let us know if you want to add more to it. But I think that's a very rich answer. And I'm putting up a link to the Bartle taxonomy on Twitter. That's a very, very powerful way of thinking of things. Do you think people who go on to become academics, how do we fit in the taxonomy? Do you think we're mostly killers?
Well, I guess that might just depend on the person and maybe their role. I think most academics are probably explorers. I mean, if you're in academia, you're curious, I think,
Right.
about something, and explorers are inherently curious.
Do you think lawyers then would be an example of that? People who really want to tease out all the different levels of
Oh
this.
yeah, absolutely.
And I wonder if people who are especially comfortable, who find schools to be comforting places and rewarding places, would also fit under the socializing. Right.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, this is a fascinating thing. Well, I'm checking Twitter to look for more examples of questions. But remember, if you guys have any questions about gaming and gamification, please either tweet at us, use the ask button to raise your hand, or to type in a question so we can hear more from you. I have a question to ask, which is, economically speaking, American higher education is in a pretty challenging time for all kinds of reasons. Rich this morning talked about the decrease in state funding.
Yep.
And most universities, colleges, campuses, as well as libraries and museums are under a lot of financial pressure. I think the financial crash of 2008 helped knock gaming back a bit in American higher ed. How do you make a pitch for a school which is decreasing tenure, a school which may be having a hard time doing physical site replacement or computer replacement, or keeping their physical stacks in their library open? How do you convince them to spend resource and time, people, on gaming, gamification?
Well, I think the first thing is to try to do a lot of the legwork yourself, and start designing and creating prototypes. If you're talking about how to kind of get a pitch out there successfully, show them that it works, that you have a functioning prototype, and find case studies that display that it works.
So a functioning prototype from someone else?
Or from yourself. I mean, there are tools out there like Balsamiq was what I was using in my workshop that are fairly easy to use. And that just goes such a long way when you're pitching, especially when you're pitching it to someone that may or may not be super gaming literate. They haven't played a whole lot of games or understand game design. If you can just show them that interaction, people's eyes light up. So or even just paper prototyping. I mean, you don't have to. You can do lo-fi pitches. So,
what's the name of that tool again?
It's a Balsamiq with a Q at the end. BLAL.
I see. Excellent.
BAL.
Excellent. Oh, excellent. So I'll have to link to that as well in the notes and on Twitter. But it's important, I think, what you point out. In 2003, we had one of the first great books urging us to think about gaming and education, from James Paul G. A game about a book, very short, powerful book about gaming and literacy. And it's been 13 years since. And one of the nice things is that means, among other things, we have many examples of people teaching with games, developing games. And we have a lot of articles, more than a few books, quite a few PowerPoint presentations, videos, blog posts. And of course, we've been teaching with games before that. So I think that's a very powerful answer you have, that you can show someone, look, this isn't a weird thing out of nowhere. This is actually an established pedagogy.
Yep.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Well, I'm curious, what would you, thinking about the conference so far, thinking what you've heard from our first guest, and what you've heard from the keynote speaker, and what you've heard just from hallway conversations with people, I'm looking ahead to the sessions. How do you think gaming plays a role in the rest of education technology? What are some of the connections you would draw out?
I think where gamification will probably have a huge impact on kind of an individual college, like the entire college, not just the students, but also the faculty and the professional staff, is in training, and also in kind of the usability of the entire university, if that makes sense.
Wow, usability of the university.
Yeah, like
that's well, what's the saying that the gaming will be the art form of the 21st century? Right?
I haven't heard that, but I like that.
Well, if cinema was from the 20th century, right? Then in many ways, think, well, how do you redesign a university if your thinking is influenced by gaming, gamification?
Well, I work with. So I was a first generation, and
where'd you go to school?
Ball State University.
Great.
And the app that we use is usually for at-risk students that are, most of them are first generation students. And I can see clearly it's not always that students don't get the material, or they're not smart enough, or they don't
Right.
work hard enough.
Right.
It's that they don't necessarily know to check their email. They've never heard the word bursar or registrar.
Right.
And so that's poor usability.
That's very poor usability.
And being able to, no one should fail out of college for those reasons.
Right.
And so that's where I think we need to use aspects of game design, aspects of gamification to increase the usability of the modern university and college.
We had a long reading for about 4 months where we worked through Robert Putnam's book, Our Kids, which is a recent sociological text taking a look at income stratification K-12 in the U.S. And he proved, I think, pretty conclusively that we're seeing K-12 schools really shifting at a micro level, often a few blocks from each other, where we have schools for the 1%, schools for the 99%, for example. I wonder if we're not going to see kids graduating, young adults graduating from high school with decreasing knowledge of where the bursar is, what a registrar is, making the problem even worse. Perhaps one solution is to take your gamified and reach out to high schools and middle schools and say, this is a way to leap ahead of that problem and get ahead of the curve.
Absolutely.
Is Ohio doing that? Are you seeing that in? Are you seeing a lot of
Ohio? Indiana.
Indiana. Excuse me. Oh, no offense intended.
Yeah.
I mean, are you seeing interest in deepening connections between secondary and post-secondary schools?
I haven't personally. I can't say that it's not there. I just haven't personally.
I keep an eye out for that. Yeah. There's a wonderful game design that came out of Pennsylvania. A historian named Christian Spielvogel worked with a fantastic online archive called The Valley of the Shadow. If you haven't seen, are you interested in Civil War at all?
Yeah.
Oh, well, take a look at this.
Sure.
Then we won't see you for a week. Basically, it's a very simply, it's an archive of microhistorical data from 2 towns in the Shenandoah Valley. All kinds of data, diary entries, newspaper entries, people's letters home during the Civil War. And it's a fantastic archive. And what Christian did was he used it to create characters in the Civil War: a typical soldier, a typical farmer, a typical lawyer, a typical mechanic, and had students role play them in order to think about issues of the Civil War. And what's fascinating is it worked really well at the college level, the undergraduate level. It's a big hit in middle schools and high schools. He's actually been traveling around from Michigan and elsewhere, helping schools use this. I think what a fantastic idea. From a historical perspective, it's grounded in primary source materials. Yeah. And from gaming, you've got role playing, and you can build anything on top of that you want.
And it satisfies those different kinds of people too.
Yes.
The different kinds of players.
The explorer.
Yep.
Right? No, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, let me see if we have any more questions. If we have any more comments that are coming for you. Again, Scott is. We have links to where we can find him online, and we can find George already criticizing me for my desperate political error of conflating Ohio and Indiana. Terrible to see that. I don't see any more questions that we have yet. Did you have any questions for us, or anything else you wanted to add in?
No, I think we kind of covered a lot of the bases.
Well, I look forward to seeing your future work, and I think you're doing great stuff. I think Ball State has a lot to show people.
Thank you very much.
So let me thank you very much for coming.
Thanks
if you
for
have
having me
time,
on.
why don't you stick around a little while longer?
Yeah.
If we can bring Stephen, if we can bring you on stage. Well, you could do that. So, all right, it's great to see you.
Hi.
I'm glad you could come. My first question to ask you is, what are you doing at Campus Tech? Are you presenting? You had a workshop yesterday. Are you doing a workshop?
Had a workshop yesterday on designing a personal learning infrastructure.
Oh, excellent, excellent.
And I've given that one a number of times, and which is unusual for me because I don't usually repeat stuff. But that works because every context is different.
Right.
Every audience is different, and I'm different.
From time to time.
No. Every talk I give, I'm a different person.
That's what I mean. Over time.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, because I've read stuff, I've seen stuff,
You've done stuff. Yeah.
I've done stuff. So I recreate the presentation over again. And my logic for that is, if I planned it ahead of time, I'd still be rewriting it. So I just write it fresh each time. I reuse
Excellent.
slides sometimes and things like that, but I
Sure.
try to change it up.
Oh, that's great and good for the audience.
I think so. Yeah.
So that was the Personal Learning Networks. And are you doing anything this week as well?
I got a keynote tomorrow.
Oh, excellent. Excellent.
So yeah, and that's, I forget the title. I never remember the titles.
But since you're redoing it, what's the gist?
So I'm looking at the topic of innovation from the perspective of predicting the future. Right, and that's why this particular this series is of interest to me too. And people have this idea that you can't predict the future, and of course that's not true. Can predict the future, but otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here together today.
Who made a schedule? I was able to predict that you would be here, and I had a certain degree of confidence that you would.
You have misplaced confidence, but
but it worked out.
It worked out. Yeah.
But then that's true. We do have short-term predictions. We have scheduling. We have planning.
Oh, we have long-term predictions too. I mean, we know where the Earth will be in thousands of years. We pinpoint it precisely. So I dare astrology to make predictions like that.
Oh, they do. They just you just can't test them.
Yeah. So from that perspective, are we able to do that, and then look at the concept of innovation in that light? Because innovation, people say, it's not just about having the idea; it's about executing the idea and about there being a benefit. And these things combined together with some understanding of how to predict the future give us a story about innovation and about what I'm going to want to talk about, transformation.
That's very different from Clayton Christensen.
Yeah, it is. I cite him. I talked about what he says a bit, but yeah, I want to go beyond Christensen. I think that the concept of innovation and even disruptive innovation, these are inherently conservative concepts. They're based on preserving what we have.
Also, literally conservative.
Literally conservative. Yeah, I'm not dealing with left-right politics here. No, I mean literally conservative. Literally, they deal with preserving what we have. And you look at the innovation, some of the innovations that have taken place now. I'm known for talking about MOOCs and working in MOOCs and things like that. People look at MOOCs and what happened with MOOCs, and ultimately it ended up being a conservative phenomenon. The big innovation was to make online learning a lot like traditional learning.
And now you're seeing that with closed MOOCs and for-pay MOOCs and
the oxymoron called closed MOOCs.
That's right.
Yeah, the oxymoron called for-pay MOOCs. So yeah.
So looking ahead, what are some of the changes that you anticipate happening in higher education? And now you're based in Canada, and one of the things that I love about your work is you're one of the few people who is actually transnational in thinking. And you pay careful attention to national differences, national nuances, but you actually pay attention to countries other than Canada, other than the United States.
Oh yeah.
I mean, what are some of the big forces you're seeing? Some of the big changes.
Well, I mean, open online learning is huge. It's a lot more huge than people give it credit for. And people are talking about, this MOOCs have peaked. It's the end of MOOCs. MOOCs are so over. And yet there's this ongoing huge demand for open online learning. I like to say, more people took a MOOC last year, 2015, than in all previous years combined. It's not a phenomenon that's over.
No, quite the opposite.
Yeah. So I think that's really important. There's a lot of talk, especially in corporate learning, but it bleeds over into academia as well, about competencies. What's the
competency-based learning?
Competency-based learning, yeah. But there was a phrase that was used this morning during the keynote. I'm trying to remember what mastery learning.
Yes, mastery learning from Bloom.
Yeah. And recognition for learning, micro recognition badges, things like that, and of course leading us to quote unquote personalized learning. I think this is going to be a very temporary phase in learning. And the reason why I think it's going to be very temporary is because it's so unnecessary. We're not actually solving the real problem that people have when they're going after learning. The real problem people have isn't, gee, I need to be recognized for this. I know it's represented that way a lot, but the real problem people have is, well, it's one of two things. There's probably many things, but I'll caricature it, right? It's one of two things, right? First of all, they need to know something in order to get something done, right? And that characterizes the vast 80% area known as informal learning, right? So you don't need a credit for that. You just need to get done what you're going to get done.
Oh, because it's instrumental.
It's instrumental.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay.
So badges aren't solving any problem there, right? Because
that's what you mean.
So the other side, right, the formal learning,
right?
The reason why they need recognition is so that the learning that they've achieved, and we can talk about what that means, but the learning they've achieved opens doors for them, specifically gives them employment opportunities, perhaps advancement.
Right.
Well, since a lot of this achievement is going to be available through digital records, through open digital records, a person's life will, in a sense, be, I don't want to say an open book because it'll be based on permissions and all of that, but available, right?
Okay.
So why give them a credential? Just offer them a job, right? So I like to say it in slogan form, your achievement in learning will be recognized not by a diploma, but by a job offer.
This sounds a bit like David Weinberger's observation about using data instead of metadata.
Yeah, exactly.
So if I want to figure out, should I hire this Stephen Downes character, I can go through your blog, I can go through whatever you present to us, whatever you don't present to us, I can explore. And that will be ultimately more useful to me from an HR perspective than it would be just looking at your credentials.
Well, exactly. In fact, the credentials are probably misleading. The credentials will tell you I'm a master's in philosophy, period, end of story.
And that doesn't tell me very much.
Not very much, and it's, like I say, it's misleading. It's not inaccurate. I do have a master's in philosophy, and I have deep knowledge of the subject, but, I think I bring more to the table.
So if the major need for education, formal and informal, is instrumental. So I want to learn Python so I can make program. I want to learn how to dig gardens so I can eat. And then we have the smaller use, which is credentialed. And it was and is credentialed, but you think in the future it won't be credentialed. Was there a third category, or is that the
that's the lot.
So I can
Unless you can think of one. I mean, I'm always open to these things.
I was thinking of subdivisions of these, basically. So this is the two categories stand. Do you think then that we would see a shift towards campuses producing more ways of sharing data? So moving towards more e-portfolios, for example, domain of one's own, in order to get students producing more open content?
That's a hard question because it speaks to intentions, right? What do they want to do? Now, if campuses behave like typical businesses, which many of them are, not all of them, but many of them are, then what they will do is desperately cling to their existing market share, which means they're not going to share data. Right. They'll desperately cling to their existing business model. They will seek out quote unquote innovation,
right,
to bring us back, because I like to tie things together. But this innovation will be deeply conservative and continue to preserve the idea that what you need in your education is to be found exclusively on the university campus. What the internet teaches us is that this is increasingly false. So I think, again, people say, well, everybody predicted the collapse of the university system, and look how wrong they were. They were saying that about newspapers 5 years ago. Everybody predicted the collapse of newspapers, and look how wrong they were, because everybody's still reading them.
They're doing badly.
Yeah.
I mean, the only form of journalism that is doing well financially is TV news, for which I think we should be embarrassed for all time.
Yeah, you really should be. Yeah. And even that, with the exodus from cable to streaming media, cable news might be reaching its best before date as well.
Oh, I think it's starting to stink.
Yeah, well, it's turned, definitely.
Yeah. it's right. I want to pursue this, but we have a question from Abram.
No question. Just kidding.
So if we could bring Abram up on stage.
This is
Hello. Hi, Stephen. I really want to thank you. I've followed your work for a while, and it's really been helpful to me. My question is, I'm thinking about new tools like the Slack team communication platform really offers an opportunity in the workplace for greater connectivity, diversity, knowledge sharing. But I think people are also rightly worried about managing their attention and becoming overwhelmed by too many different feeds. This is something that comes up a lot with MOOCs. I'd just love to hear a few thoughts from you on the topic.
So yeah, and I'm familiar with Slack. We've used Slack internally. It's a nice system. Again, I prefer things that are way more distributed, but you take what you can get. The very idea of distributed knowledge sources leads to that sort of question. How are you going to manage all of this stuff? And the short answer is we're going to use tools that will help us do that a lot. And it's also the answer to the question Brian didn't ask, which was, how do we use actual evidence as opposed to certificates in order to understand a person's achievements when it takes, hours to go through somebody's evidence?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we use analytics, we use artificial intelligence, and we use specifically systems that are designed to, and I use the word very precisely, nice, what it is I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And these systems, and I want to be clear that I'm talking about going beyond the sort of recommender systems that we have in Netflix or things like that. You watch one Western on Netflix and they're pitching like John Wayne to you for the rest of your life. Not good. We're looking at much more sophisticated systems. Again, systems that use the broad scope of your interactions with others, other social media, other people, other sites, in order to understand your needs and your preferences. A lot of the existing recommender systems are based on a very narrow evidence base. Mm-hmm. Netflix really only has evidence about what movies you watch on Netflix. They don't even look at other services. Just craziness. So I think it's going to be a personal kind of analytics. It'll have to be a personal kind of analytics, grabbing a vast swath of your data, running it through a graph-based, network-based kind of analysis. Yes. In order to, and then you present it with, the full range of evidence that's in front of you, all the possible things that you might be interested in looking at, or all the possible candidates for a specific position or whatever, right? I mean, there's different scenarios. And it pulls out a subset of those as being most likely.
And then as you repeat this, the system learns and gets better and better at this.
That's right. And just as a caution, this does not mean, I never know how to pronounce this word, homophily or homophily. It doesn't mean you're going to be narrowing in through and getting a filter bubble of only the stuff that already meets.
How do you avoid that?
You avoid that.
Intentional design?
Well, no, I don't like intentional design because it's so often wrong. I mean, the way a tool reacts is based on how a person uses the tool, right? So if all you ever watch are Westerns, then the system's going to recommend Westerns to you.
Right.
If you watch a reasonably diverse array of movies, I'm just using movies as an example, but then the system is going to be pulling in a much broader array of categories. But even more to the point, a neural network system specifically isn't going to be category based. It isn't going to be taxonomy based. It's going to be pulling cues which are subcategorical, technically even subsymbolic. So you don't know you're looking for things of that type, but it'll see something. So, I'm watching all my movies. It'll see something in a modern romance, which I wouldn't typically click on. And it says, oh, and you can't even put a finger on what that thing is, but it recognizes this romance fits well enough and presents it to you.
If I can shift the analogy a bit, that sounds a bit more like Pandora, which isn't looking at recommendations of, okay, you're listening to smooth jazz or hard rock, but it's actually looking at instrumentation, time signature, length of song.
But again, and that's a good point, but again, these are predefined categories, right? If you go beyond that, you go beyond predefined categories, then it's looking for things you can't even name.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, we'll be pretty. I mean, I think we'll find these systems. They're very similar to human perceptual mechanisms.
Sure.
So they're responding to what's out there the way you would respond, looking at, for those of us who are old enough, looking at the selection of videos in the video store, right?
Right.
And it's like, oh, yeah, maybe.
Or a good librarian or a good bookseller. So I'm interested in a new book, and they can look at you, and the more they know about you, and some of those cues will be, subvocal.
Yeah.
Abram, that was a terrific question with a lot of depth to it. Thank you. If I can turn that question back to something earlier, and then I want to bring you in a second, Scott.
Sure.
You mentioned yesterday working on the personal learning network or personal learning environment. To what extent, how do you see analytics and artificial intelligence playing a role?
Well, there's a bunch of different things they can do, right? I various slides for presentations I've done. I've broken it down a bit. There's one type of task is a categorization task. So you're looking at a selection of stuff, whatever it is, and you organize it into clusters, whatever they are. That's the kind of task that automatic grading systems do, right? You're looking at a bunch of student essays. It classifies them into A's, B's, C's, and D's, right? Based on essentially feature detection. So that's one thing. What would you use that for? I don't know. There's all kinds of uses for that. You've got, again, your all of your stuff coming in from the world. Thousands of sources every day. It'll give you a list of genres that you can pick from.
Nice.
They're not predefined genres, but
that's good.
So any categorization task actually has two parts to it. Number one, you divide the categories. That's easy.
Right.
Number two, you name them. That's hard.
It's powerful.
Naming it, but that's the only way you're going to be able to select from genres, right? Is if they have names. So it'll find the categories and name them for you.
Well, and I understand your criticism of Netflix, but I have to, in their defense, say they do one thing that provides entertainment for me, which is ever more refined subcategories. So for instance, it becomes occult westerns, and then it becomes dark westerns with a cerebral hero.
Yeah.
And then those become ludicrous over time, but very entertaining.
Yeah, one of my favorite categories: movies with a strong female lead. That's a category. That's great.
It has to be. It has to be.
Yeah.
And that's a mid-range category, I would say. You need movies with a strong female lead that are
science
fiction and involve paranoid themes from the 1970s, right?
Yeah. Now we're getting.
Well, let me ask. I mean, that sounds like a very, very powerful tool. That sounds like a fantastic way to work. And I say this as someone who spends a lot of time in a bunch of categories. I have lots and lots of Twitter columns, and I have many RSS feeds broken out. I'm wondering what.
I saw you reading Twitter there while we were talking.
Yes, I had to. That's where I got some of these questions from. I'm wondering, Scott, what does gaming add to someone's personal learning environment? What does it do for their personal learning network? I mean, just to see this a little bit, I'm a very big fan of Duolingo, which is a language learning app, which is very gamified. And I've started learning Spanish because I shamefully don't have it, so I've been learning it. And I find that really changes my approach to the language and learning. That's one little example. I mean, what are you imagining going forward for gaming and personal learning environment?
Well, I guess with Duolingo, like some of the things that gaming really helps with education is just getting that instant feedback on what you're doing. I love in that app the sound design of it. Actually, that was the first thing I realized that was really impressive was the sound design of Duolingo.
What do you like about that? That's just so crisp and clear, or?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's almost like Mario or Sonic or anything. But just when you pronounce something correctly, when you do something correctly, it gives the little chime, and
right.
I think it even has a slight buzzer sound when you get it wrong. So yeah.
But no electric shock or anything. That's good too.
No, not at this point. They might have an attachment or something at some point for it.
Okay, so this helps you as an individual learner. Do you see any connection between an individual gaming, in a sense, or playing a game or gamified learning object, and the rest of learning, the rest of social learning or other objects in the world?
Well, games in general, any games at heart are about learning. I mean, when you're interacting with a game, any kind of game system, you're learning how to use that game. So it's really the same thing. And sometimes we have a very convoluted class that's really just a very convoluted game in the same way. You're trying to get from point A to point B the same way you are in a game. So,
I often think that flying air travel in the U.S. is the world's worst multiplayer game. So you have points, you have levels. It's clearly artificial. It's clearly badly done. Barely shambles along. That's a metaphor, but I do have to learn it. I mean, my children are learning how to fly now, and I feel apologetic to them for this. But they have to learn where things are. In your example of the campus, they have to learn where the bursar is. They have to learn how to work with agents and so on. So gaming is learning. And maybe between the two of you gentlemen, we have this synthesis of rethinking personal learning networks as a gamified experience, either explicitly with having points and values and levels, or at least implicitly bringing game design principles to PLNs and PLEs. What do you think? What do you say?
Well, I am thinking about that. I mean, first of all, I love games. And I've spent way too many of my hours online gaming. If I was gaming, it brought me into the field in the first place. It's multi-user games.
Oh, sure.
So I used to play them, and I used to code them.
Yeah.
So, loved those.
I taught a class in one in the 90s.
Yeah, I didn't teach a class properly, so-called, in one. We held a conference in one in the 90s, 95, in fact, for the Canadian Association of Distance Education. That'll be my phone ringing. That was well done. But
and there's a big but here.
Yeah. With respect to learning, maybe you can go in two directions. You can go in the direction of games, or you can go in the direction of real life, right? With a very similar kind of environment. And you talk about airlines, which is, real life. It feels pretty artificial sometimes, but it's like real life.
Right.
And I think that education's future is probably more in the area of real life than it is in the area of gamification. And I'm being precise here. I mean gamification as opposed to serious games. So, because we have a gamification system in real life, it's called money. Right, and money is your point system. I'm looking forward to the day, and maybe we will have. That'll be my message now. Right? I'm looking forward to the day when we have alternative gamification systems in real life, raising enough pain points, financial points.
What's Cory Doctorow as Wuffy?
Wuffy, whatever. I don't know about Cory Doctorow's Wuffy, but that's okay.
That's a popular name.
Oh, I don't read Doctorow. I don't. He doesn't appeal to me. I know he appeals to a lot of people.
We can talk about this afterwards.
Yeah. Well, and it's nothing specific. It's just a thing.
Well, to go back to your point, you think that
It's like Neil Gaiman, right? There's celebrity, sort of internet celebrity.
For Gaiman, you have to read the comics. That's the best thing. But but for alternative things, we used to have a few gamified parts of our society that we no longer have as mainstream. So if you think of the Western culture, we had religion in a certain way where that would be very public. You'd have certain coin that you would trade, and that would be a major way of determining life, and that's extreme right now.
You still have that. I mean, there's a chapel outside.
Well, no, but it's not something it's explicit. It's something you think about at a conference. I mean, we don't have to ask, are you sinning today, or or which subject of Christianity do you belong to? We can, but.
You think of the Code of the West, right? The Code of the West, you had not just your wealth, but you had your honor.
Yeah.
Right? And people valued their honor more than they valued their wealth.
There's
can't wait till we get away from wealth as being the only game in town.
Well, the Star Trek points the way, I think, in that way, as does Ian Banks in the Culture series. So it may be that, to come back to learning, though, I mean, there's two different ways forward then, which may be parallel. One is increased gamification, gaming, and the other is turning pedagogy into real life and more actual practical work. I want to, if we have time, I want to pursue that. But we have a question from Sandro Monteiro. If I mispronounce your name, please forgive me. Sandro asks, if a shift in recognizing competence indeed happens from credentials to what you can really do, back to real life, what should change in education and higher ed? That's a big question.
Oh, what should change? Again, it's like that. The quote from Buckminster Fuller in this morning's keynote.
Trim tab.
It wasn't about the trim tab specifically, but it was the idea that you change a system not by fighting it, but by making it irrelevant. And so, the questions like, what should change in higher education always presuppose that the change is going to happen within the system. And I really doubt that. In fact, I so doubt that. It's like trying to reform Fox News from within the newsroom, and it's not going to happen. It's gonna happen outside Fox News. It's gonna happen by something else being more worth watching than that.
That's a market solution in a way.
Well, it's a market solution in a way. I mean, we could have a talk about market solutions because what we call a market is really a very controlled and managed environment. It's not a market at all.
And it is a game.
Well, it's gamified.
Yes.
It's not a game. It's real life. But it is gamified, and as a result, as a result of it being gamified, people pursue really inappropriate ends within the market. Inappropriate as in ends that are destructive to the market as a whole, with the result that, for example, most of the world's wealth is stashed away in overseas bank accounts, and there's more money out there than there is stuff to buy. And if this money that's stashed away was ever released, we would destroy our economic system. But that's all aside.
That's a different game.
It's a different game. But so what will change in the educational system? Probably nothing. They will hold on until the very end. There will be professors on stage saying, I am not going to use a whiteboard. Real math is done on a chalkboard. And they'll retire that way. I mean, this is the other Kuhnian point when you talk about paradigm shifts, right? One paradigm replaces the other, not through changing minds, but through the death of the people who live in the old paradigm.
I call this the Soviet model of change.
Soviet model, well, the Soviet model is an accelerated model of that.
Well, it did take 30 years for it to happen, but and this is the end of Fox News. The median viewer of Fox News is something like 69 or 70 years old.
Yeah, this is how it ends.
So about 15 years to go or so,
and then it's done. And it's also the case for newspapers, and it's also the case for the university system.
Oh, I was waiting for that climax. I'm conscious of time, folks. We are at the end of our hour, but we have one question from the excellent Kisa Johnson. Can we bring Kisa up on stage? And Kisa, where are you today?
I am working from home today. I am working
Oh,
from
great.
home. I'm
Great.
from
Good
I'm
for
in
you.
Michigan. I'm in East Lansing. Yeah.
Well, that's
Oh,
okay.
can you guys hear me? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So here's my question. Oh, it was great. I'm gonna have to listen to more of the beginning, but here's my question, especially to Stephen, and I like the other panelists to answer as well. I've been really trying to dig, like, I don't know, my spirit has been following me in the theory of emergence right now, and I really wanted to know, like, could you give me some type of insight when it comes to that theory of emergence and how that fit into online learning?
And how that fits into online learning. So well, I mean, it's a terrific question. It's also one that'll take 4 or 5 hours to answer. But okay.
Talk offline.
So yeah. So let's deal first of all. What is emergence, right? Emergence is a phenomenon that can be seen in a larger collection of things, typically a network of things, that is not present in the individual entities of that thing. So the example I use a lot is a picture of Richard Nixon on a television screen. Right. So the television screen, I know, is not standard, but it's close enough. So the television's of a whole bunch of little pixels. All right. None of those little pixels is an image of Richard Nixon, right? But the way those pictures are organized on the screen results in there being an image of Richard Nixon on the screen. So we can say a little loosely, right? But we can say the image of Richard Nixon is an emergent property of the pixels. We can say it that way, right? And technically there are some inaccuracies, but it's close enough that I can use that to make the point.
Okay.
So, okay. What does that have to do with learning? So, one of the theories of connectivism, theses of connectivism, is that knowledge is the organization of a network of entities, like, for example, neurons in the brain, or like, for example, people and artifacts in a society, right? So, or other networks, but these two are the important ones that I'll talk about for now. So we have a network in society and a network of neurons in the brain. So let's take just the brain for now. So we have a bunch of neurons. They're kind of like pixels, but they're not, right? But they're kind of like pixels. And our thought that, say, Paris is the capital of France is not contained in any one of those individual neurons, because a neuron can't do that. Neurons are really stupid. They can go, da, 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 and that's it, right? But you take enough neurons in a network together, and emergent from that is the piece of knowledge that Paris is the capital of France. Social networks work the same way. So you have a bunch of people and a bunch of artifacts, and they're all connected together. You have individual people. They may have ideas like Paris is the capital of France or whatever, but the knowledge of a society isn't simply Paris is the capital of France, but it's emergent from all of those individuals. So an example I use is the knowledge of how to fly a 747 from New York to Paris. No person in society has that knowledge. Nobody. Right, because think about what you have to know. You have to know how to make tires. You have to know how to make airline windows. You have to know how to take off the plane flight and hopefully land it. You have to know how to serve coffee during turbulence. You have to be able to navigate it, etc. I could go on and on and on. No person has that knowledge. So that piece of knowledge is emergent from society.